Alright, hello everybody. Today we're going to talk about the Congress of Vienna. So the Congress of Vienna is really the final stage of this whole Napoleonic saga. So we've talked about the rise of the French Revolution from its original Enlightenment beginnings. We've gone through the radical phase of the French Revolution, where we saw Robespierre and his minions killing thousands of French citizens, to the more moderate Directory that really enabled the rise of Napoleon himself. Well, the story of the Congress of Vienna is the end of that Napoleonic age. So we really pick off here right at Napoleon's exile to Elba, because almost immediately upon being exiled to Elba, after his first significant loss after the invasion of Russia, we see him already starting to plan his arrival back in Europe. And it doesn't take long for Napoleon to do just that. Napoleon will return to Europe in what we call the 100 days, which is the period of time that Napoleon is back in power in France after his exile to Elba. And the question then becomes, why do the people of France embrace Napoleon returning? Well, the reality is the person who's in charge while Napoleon is in Elba is absolutely despised by the French people. His name was Louis XVIII. He is the brother of the deceased Louis XVI, and he really stands for almost everything that the French people had grown to hate as part of the old regime. He is part of the Bourbon dynasty, he has very little interest in helping the people at all, and he lives this extraordinarily decadent lifestyle that is very much brought together by his surprising weight during this time period. The people just really did not like Louis. So when Napoleon arrives back in France, they are thrilled to see him again, because he is this man that they have all rallied behind in times past. And even though he's done some pretty atrocious things in his conquering of Europe, the French people are willing to overlook that, because they think he's going to bring that glory back to France, make them proud of what it means to be French again, and kind of just rewind the clock a little bit in order to go back to those glory days. Well, immediately upon coming back to France, Napoleon does what he does best, and that is raise an army. He needs to defend his throne from the Quadruple Alliance, who saw Napoleon's re-arrival in France as a threat. And what we have is one of the most iconic battles, not just of European history or in the 1800s, but, of warfare in general, and that is the Battle of Waterloo. We're at the Battle of Waterloo. The Quadruple Alliance, led by the Duke of Wellington, will face off against Napoleon's forces. And unfortunately for Napoleon, he doesn't have that trained Grand Armée that he had once upon a time in his early career. This is really whatever is left in France after all of his invasions and wars in his time conquering Europe. And because of that, he is going to lose once again. But this time, the European powers are going to take a little bit more precaution as to what to do with Napoleon. As opposed to before, where they sent him to Elba, which was just off the coast of Italy, this time he is going to be exiled again, but to an island called St. Helena, which is just a little bit more out of the way for Europeans, because it's in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, about as far away from really any sort of civilization as humanly possible. And it'll be here that Napoleon lives for the next 6 years before he dies. Because, and a kind of ironic twist of fate, after losing at Waterloo, Napoleon kind of decides that it's no longer really worth living at this point. He attempts to kill himself consuming poison, but unfortunately for him, the poison doesn't actually kill him. Instead, it causes him to have an extraordinary amount of pain that will persist for the rest of his life. That will be for roughly only about another 6 years, until he dies of cancer, probably caused from the poison he ingested after Waterloo. But that's not the story we're talking about today. The end of Napoleon is one that's really captured in a lot of movies and literature and stuff. What we really want to focus on today is the post-Napoleon Europe, where the major powers of Europe are going to get together at something called the Congress of Vienna and look to kind of rebuild Europe in a post-Napoleonic age. So the major countries of Europe, Russia, Prussia, Austria, Britain, and France, are all going to meet in the city of Vienna. And in Vienna, they're going to look to kind of rebuild the map, put things back into order, and kind of see if they can rewind the clock a little bit to pre-French Revolution time. So, let's look at the major player here. The guy in charge of all of this is going to be named Clemens von Metternich. He is the Austrian foreign minister, and he is a prince. So he's very much tied to the kind of status quo in Austria at this time. And it is going to be his goal to create a Europe in which there can never be another Napoleon Bonaparte. We can't have one country strong enough that they can conquer all of the other countries of Europe and kind of dictate terms for the other nations. So to create kind of a balance of power that exists. So this is his plan, and to do this he has three different parts of his overarching create balance in Europe goal. First up, he wants to prevent future French aggression by really creating a metaphorical wall around France, by having strong countries surrounding its borders in order to prevent France from being able to mow over them in the future. He wants to establish a balance of power so that different countries can ally together in order to prevent one country from becoming too strong. And then lastly, he's going to try to return legitimate monarchs back to their thrones in Europe whenever possible. So these three things are going to dictate what happens during the Congress of Vienna, and it's going to be a long process. This is not going to be easy for anyone involved. That being said, there are some more finer details as well too, and some ulterior motives that will play into this as well, as Metternich, even though he's supposed to be creating this equal peace for everyone, does have some more personal goals that he has in mind as well too. So let's start with this whole situation, because as the graphic here is showing you, Metternich is unintentionally creating a bit of a time bomb that's going to explode later on. So let's see how this plays out. First up, we have the containment of France. So in order to prevent future French aggression, Metternich is going to kind of redraw the map of Europe here in hopes of really creating strong borders around France to prevent them from being able to invade other countries in the future. So first up, he's actually going to cede some Austrian territory to the nation of the Netherlands. And this is going to allow the Netherlands to become a stronger overall nation that will serve as a better boundary to kind of control the French and keep them in check. After that, the Holy Roman Empire is going to be officially disbanded permanently. It is going to be replaced with something called the German Confederation, or, depending on your historian, the Confederation of the Rhine. They're interchangeable terms for the same political body. The key aspect of this, though, is that the German Confederation is actually going to be dominated by Austria. So Austria gives a little bit away for the Netherlands, but gets what we would consider the greater portion of Germany as kind of payback for that. We also see Switzerland be recognized as an independent country at this point in time. So instead of having independent Swiss city-states, you have one centralized Switzerland. And then lastly, to the southeastern border of France, we see the area that formerly was known as Genoa is going to be given to the Kingdom of Sardinia. This is going to create a little bit of a stronger border to the southeast portion of France. This nation will later be rebranded as Piedmont Sardinia and will eventually lead towards the unification effort of a united Italy. So we're really laying some of the foundation for the future events of the 19th century. So a little bit easier to see all the stuff that's going on here. Larger portion of the map. Netherlands becomes stronger, Confederation of the Rhine/German Confederation is born, Switzerland is born, and this Kingdom of Sardinia is going to be a major player in the future. So that's one step. Now this brings up this whole Metternich person again, because it looks like from the outside perspective that Metternich is doing everything he can to prevent future French aggression, but the reality is Metternich is an Austrian prince who has deep ties to the Austrian monarchy, and one of his goals as part of this Congress of Vienna is to really elevate Austria as much as possible, to make them a major player on the European scene. Because even though Austria is important, they've never been one of those key players, at least not in the last few hundred years. So Metternich is really trying to use this conference to really set Austria up, and this is where we get our time bomb that I mentioned earlier. Because he's trying to manipulate the scene from behind the curtains, but in reality he's putting some things into motion that will eventually lead us towards the disaster that is World War I. He doesn't know that yet, but we're getting there, and it'll make sense as the semester continues on. Next part of his plan is to create a balance of power in Europe. One thing that Metternich knew and understood very well throughout this entire Congress of Vienna was that France has an important role to serve in Europe. It is one of the largest nations of Europe. It is still one of the more powerful nations of Europe, even after all the losses in the Napoleonic Wars. Any attempt to destroy France, to cripple it, to break it up, anything like that, would be a disaster for the rest of Europe. Not only economically would that be an issue, but it potentially would set up for the rise of another future Napoleon who could rally the people behind what these outside powers would do to it. So one of the things that Metternich really focuses on is that even though France must be punished in some way because of the French aggression over the course of the last 150 years, there needs to be balance in their approach. So maybe take France from being like a tier 1 country to maybe a tier 2 country. Still important, still valuable, but not capable of really dominating affairs like it had been. And this is an important lesson. Metternich was incredibly intelligent for this era. He's one of the great political minds of the 19th century. And this lesson, this realization that he had, would have been very useful at the end of World War I, where the European leaders did the exact opposite of this and really set the stage for the rise of the fascist regimes in Italy and Germany because they were so crippling to the nations that had lost World War I. So Metternich is trying to recreate that balance of power. So one part of it is by not crippling France, and we'll get to the next part of it in a second, where we're going to see some alliances and stuff try to really balance the situation as well too. But let's move on to this legitimacy issue. This is the last key piece of his plan for the Congress of Vienna, and it's probably the most complicated of the three. To be a legitimate monarch is to be either born into the position because of law, so your father was the king, so then the son, or in some cases the daughter, becomes the next, or you are legitimately chosen by the people of a country. Now, Metternich would have preferred people born into the position. He wanted to maintain those absolute monarchies that existed in Europe. He wasn't a big fan of democracy. He has no desire to create republics or constitutional monarchies, but he's willing to recognize that that is a way a person can come to power. So we have a situation in Europe here, because during the time Napoleon was in power, he removed a lot of monarchs from power in their nations, and now he's gone. Well, what do you do with those countries where he replaced the rulers? In some cases, it's very easy, like in Portugal. The Portuguese king just came back. He had been living in Brazil with his family, which was a Portuguese colony, and he just returned to Portugal and everything went back to normal. Unfortunately, though, that's not really the case across all of Europe. Sometimes monarchs died during the time Napoleon had ruled. Sometimes we see the people turn on the person because they're extremely unpopular, or there's even the radical case of what to do in France, where the king was murdered and the person the people chose was Napoleon himself. Are you going to return Napoleon to power? I mean, that seems like a terrible idea, especially since you've now exiled him twice, and this time into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So this idea of returning legitimate monarchs is going to be a challenge across Europe, and it's really going to be one of those things Metternich has to work on for a long time to find suitable solutions for each country. But the end result is that we actually see a period of peace in Europe for the first time. Remember, we've gone now over 100 years of uninterrupted European warfare, ever since the War of Jenkins' Ear up through the end of the Napoleonic Wars at the Battle of Waterloo. So, to see a 40-year period of peace in Europe is extraordinary, and that's a great thing. People are excited about that, but it doesn't mean that everything is well. We have clear divides in how Europe is structured now. We have some countries that are going to retain those absolute monarchies, like Austria, Prussia, and Russia. And we are seeing the creation of new constitutional monarchies like Britain and France. We're not going to see a change back to absolute monarchies anymore. Countries are just going to progressively adopt more and more democratic practices as time goes on. And a lot of kings are not going to be okay with that. The French Revolution terrifies monarchs across Europe. They don't want to see what happened in France happen anywhere else. Not the least of which because they don't want to be executed themselves, but they also just don't want to lose power. But these ideas of the French Revolution are going to continue to spread. Whether it's nationalism or what they call liberalism, this idea of using Enlightenment ideas to promote democracy, Europe is forever changed as a result of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Era. And because of this, the monarchs in Europe are going to start creating alliances to try to protect themselves if anything were to happen in the future. Austria, Prussia, and Russia, the three absolute monarchies, will all create what they call the Holy Alliance. And it's established to prevent the spread of any revolution across Europe. If a revolution were to break out in any one of these three countries, the other two would come to put it out, protect the monarchies. Metternich creates an even broader concept called the Concert of Europe, which would be similar to that notion of the Holy Alliance. If a revolution breaks out, the nations of Europe come in and help stop the revolution before it turns into something chaotic like the French Revolution did. All of this is about maintaining that status quo, preventing these new ideas that came out of the Enlightenment of the French Revolution to spread across the rest of Europe. But it's not going to be easy. Even in France, a place where they've gone through literally the worst aspects of the French Revolution, we're going to see consistent arguments and fighting over what happens. Louis XVIII wants nothing to do with these liberal policies that the French Revolution had created. And because of that, we're going to see a lot of instability in France over the course of the next 100 years. Louis is going to constantly have to deal with, fighting in his own country amongst the people who really want to bring back the Enlightenment reforms, and really conservative nobility who want all of it to go back to the way it was back in the 1600s. All of this is going to be a challenge across Europe for the next 100 years. But the reality is as much as these conservative leaders would like to have stopped the spread of the French Revolution, there's nothing to stop. Once you have started the fire, it's almost impossible to put it out. And at the end of the day, the ideas of the French Revolution are not going to be stopped by the Congress of Vienna. The Congress of Vienna does provide peace for a period of time, and that is a good thing. But we are going to see dramatic change across the European continent in the 1800s. And it's not going to be confined to just Europe. Europe is evolving, and so is the world around it. The balance of power in Europe has changed dramatically. We now have two very dominant powers in Europe. One was the major power in Europe prior to Napoleon, and that is Great Britain, who hasn't taken a step back at all. And we're also seeing the rise of Prussia as a legitimate threat to the rest of Europe. Prussia, which will eventually become Germany, is going to walk away from the Congress of Vienna in a really good spot. This newly formed German Confederation, while it's under the control of Austria, isn't going to be under control of Austria for much longer. Prussia is eventually going to assume control of it, and we're going to see really the shaping of the modern Europe that we know today. We will also see in the next 40 years after Waterloo movements that will push for the creation of the modern nations of Italy and Greece and Germany, as we spoke. Latin America is going to push away from their Spanish colonizers. They're going to become free during this time period. And that's a product of the French Revolution itself, because the first nation not named the United States to really break away from a European colonizer is going to be Haiti, breaking away from the French during the time of Napoleon. And all of this serves as inspiration to these Latin American countries. And then the ideas of democracy, equality, liberty, fraternity, all of these things that were so important during the French Revolution are going to continue to evolve and manifest themselves in all the major nations of Europe. So this is not going to stop. The French Revolution will spread, and it is one of the most iconic and important events in all of European history. And there are a lot of great things that come up because of that. But as we will see as we continue to unfold the story of European history, nationalism is a two-sided coin. It does a great thing in unifying people together and providing that shared cultural heritage, which is so important today. But it also, when it makes extreme leaps towards this totalitarian push and the idea of having all the power in just your ethnic group, it can be quite terrifying as well too, because again, as we said with Metternich, he's unintentionally creating a time bomb that will eventually lead us down the path towards this guy. And with that, you guys have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you soon.